have 6 kids, beautiful wife. In this picture, if you look very closely, if you have 20/10 vision, you can see number 6. So we've been homesteading for 15 years. I'm a very big fan of efficient homesteading. My favorite hobby is folding laundry while people are still inside of it, and then throwing it across the room. So me and my kids do judo and jujitsu. John said I'm the most dangerous speaker at the event this year, but I really think he is with his emphasis on the schedule. We bought our 35 acres back in 2009. I knew nothing about homesteading and farming when we bought our acreage. I grew up Lower West Side of Youngstown, Ohio. I was your standard 1980s kids, Cheerios eating, cartoon watching, video game playing. So I did something that I did not know you could do when you bought a farm. I bought a farm, soil not included. True, all we had was rock and less than 0.5% organic matter clay. Incredible. I was such a stubborn person that I was not going to own 35 acres of land and not be able to grow food. So for the first 2 years, I grew in cardboard boxes on top of the soil because I borrowed a tiller from the neighbor and the tiller broke before the soil did. That's how bad our soil was. The extension agent for our county, when she came to our farm, she goes, "Did you know you had the worst soil in almost the entire county, in this part of the county?" I'm like, why don't you all put placards like this above the, like little pop-ups in video games that tell you what you're getting into? So I spent 3 years learning to build soil. I did like the deepest dive imaginable, because people are like, oh yeah, you could have good soil, John, 10, 15 years. Like, who got time for that? Like, I got kids on the way who I need to feed. So I learned to build roughly 6 inches of excellent growing soil in as little as 18 to 24 months. So almost all of our main growing spaces on the farm now run plus 20% organic matter. And we can do that repeatedly, block by block over the farm in about 18 to 24 months of soil building. Just absolutely beautiful soil. But the soil created a problem. Another problem I was not kind of prepared for. And I discovered this problem probably around 2013, 2014, once we had really beautiful soil. Because there's a problem with us adults in the room. We're very dumb at times. And it was a, mid-July Kentucky morning. And how many of you are from Kentucky? Great. So if you're from Kentucky, what is it like in July? It's horrible. Why does anyone live in Kentucky? It's like 150% humidity and 95 degrees at 6 in the morning. And we're out for the 3rd morning in a row with my kids trying to reclaim our garden because we have all of this really healthy, fertile soil. And what really likes healthy, fertile soil? Weeds. And so, I have kids who are pretty large, and the weeds are bigger than they are. And they're like, Dad, I can't find the plants. I'm losing children for days on end because they're just laying down and going to sleep. Like the weeds are better cover than the air conditioning in our old house. And the thing that stuck out to me is my children were learning to hate homesteading and growing food. And this is one of the dangers for us as adults. We will do things we hate because we're dumb, and then we'll wonder why our children won't follow in our footsteps. And so I was like, this is a problem I need to fix. So I went from doing a deep dive on solving the issue of soil to solving the issue of weeds. And that really let us dial in the ability to grow tremendous amounts of food in as little time as possible with as little work as possible. Because I'm all for working hard. It's just a very biblical thing. If a man does not work, he should not eat. But there's no reason to work harder than you ought or need to. So I want to give you three summary ways to help you with your weed woes. And the first one is this: you need to grow less. All of you are here because you are overly ambitious people. One of my favorite demotivational images, have you ever seen the demotivational images that says, every dead body on Mount Everest was once a motivated climber? So we're those kind of people. we like biting off more than we can chew. And it's actually not good, because that's the only way you'd be sitting here on a Wednesday morning, at a homesteading event. You're a highly motivated person. What really drove this home to me was back around 2017, driving home on a Friday night from judo. I get a text from a friend, and he goes, "I really, really need to talk to you, John. I have a significant problem I have to talk to you about tonight." And since I went to seminary and stuff, I'm like, man, this guy has marriage issues, or like one of his kids is, like, what's going on? So I get home, immediately call him up, and he's like, "John, I have a garden problem." I'm like, dude, it is 10:30 on a Friday night. What garden problem do you have that is this serious? And so earlier that winter, him and 3 families from his church had decided that they were going to do like a shared community garden among these 4 large homeschooling families. It's like 4 families, 47 children. Like, we're going to do this. These are people who have not successfully grown mint in a windowsill. Guess what size garden they decided to kick off this endeavor with? We could do like old style auction here. Throw out some numbers. What size garden? You are 4 families. You have never grown anything in your life. Half an acre, good guess. Yeah, they started with somewhere between 10 and 20,000 square foot garden with bees and chickens. And the best part is none of them live on this property. It's not a property on one of the families. It's like one of the families owns the land. It's like outside of Louisville, or like a member of the family of one of the families owns the land. So they have a 15, 20,000-ish square foot garden for the first time ever, half an hour outside of Louisville, Kentucky, with bees and chickens. The chickens were the first to go. Chickens were harmed in the process of filming this documentary, unfortunately. They spent, they rented a tiller, they bought chickens, they built a coop, they spent thousands of dollars on plants. And May was great. May in Kentucky is like heaven. It's beautiful, it's sunny, but not hot, there's no humidity yet. They get into June, and things start to disappear from the garden, because there's these things called deer in Kentucky, if you've never heard of those. But by July, there is no garden at all. There's just a jungle. He sent me a picture. He like you can see like one little cherry tomato like clawing for life over the 4-foot weeds. And so these families had an emergency meeting, and they're like, and there's always that one guy you're friends with. He's the one who's gonna in the future be on Everest. And he's like, we must reclaim the garden. We cannot lose. And so he's like, we're gonna get all of our families together, and we're gonna weed 10 hours a day, Saturday and Sunday. All of our children could put in 10 hours. My little 3-year-old who's toddling around, like, we'll give him a sai, a really sharp knife, just let him go at it right at ground level. He's like, we're going to reclaim, we are not gonna lose all of this investment. And my friend Scott's like, this guy is insane. He's like, what have we done? Too ambitious. No one looks back on a life that consists of nothing but small and medium-sized successes and regrets it. We have done nothing but the last 6 years of homesteading, but pull our deer fencing back closer and closer on our cultivated growing spaces. We have been able to do more as a family by doing less well. You will just be so much better off. So you need to grow less. The rule I want to give you is, how do you know you have appropriately sized growing spaces? So John, make this easy for me. You have a growing space that is the right size for you and your family when you can let not a single weed go to seed. That's it. You have the right size growing space when you can let not a single weed go to seed. And I'm not talking about because you're running through with Roundup every other Thursday. Or you're the guy with the tractor, and the tractor is the solution to every problem. Wife upset, tractor. Like roadway washed out, tractor. So that's not the solution we're talking about. So you have the right size growing space when you can manage it in such a way that you have nothing go to seed that you don't want to go to seed. So second, be like, this guy's a politician. talking out of both sides of his mouth. You need to grow more. It's really, really true. You need to grow more. Stop for a minute. Be like the guy who's like 8 rows back on the left whose eyes are closed. Close your eyes. Imagine in your mind what a perfect garden looks like. What does your perfect garden look like? I know when I first started growing food, what I thought a perfect garden looked like. I passed on the way up here. It was really cool. Down where I live in Kentucky, almost nobody has gardens. And driving up through this part of Ohio, it's like 1 out of 3 houses had gardens. But what does the perfect garden look like? Well, you till up a piece of land and you plant a tomato. And then you plant a tomato. Then you plant a tomato. And what do you spend the next 4 months of your life doing? It's like children in kindergarten class. You are trying to keep them from touching each other for 4 months. It's like, and you live in constant fear and dread that another plant might get too close to your tomato plant and cause problems. How many of you think of gardens that way, where everything is in isolation? I always call it, you have bare dirt exposed to the sunlight for 4 months, and isolated plants living on desert islands. It's a horrible way to grow a garden. This is my ideal garden. This is how we grow. Whenever we're planning out our growing spaces, our growing beds, my goal is to not let a single electron that comes from the sun reach the soil by July. I want my garden to be the world's greatest solar collector and conversion unit. I want to see no bare soil. And if I can get away with it, I want it to be nothing but a sea of living green. And it's amazing. Your plants will be infinitely healthier. You will get much higher bricks numbers this way. Your garden will become significantly more drought resistant. Your plants will have superb disease resistance this way. Because again, instead of it being your tomato plant all alone in the ground, its roots singing all by myself. Where they're just baking in the sun, constantly stressed. The tomatoes can trade with the clovers, can trade with the basils. You have all of these plants working together to mobilize the health of the soil, to encourage the health of the plants. How many of you have ever seen a garden this densely grown? Anyone, a few of you? How many of you could ever imagine growing a garden this densely? I'm going to go back because there's really 5 things you should be growing in your garden. You should be growing food. In my opinion, food should be no more than 50% of the square footage of your garden. 50%. And I mean, for most people, it's really less than that when you think about it. When you think about a typical tilled garden with plants laid out in separation, if you look at studies, roughly 70 to 75% of the ground level space is open. So most of you are already growing gardens that at most are 25% space efficient, doing kind of traditional gardening methods. So you definitely want to grow food. How many of you buy fertilizer for your garden? Who has to buy fertilizer every year to fertilize plants, replenish nutrients? You can grow your own fertilizer right in your garden. We grow 100% of our own nitrogen for our garden at this point. We do not have to import any nitrogen into any of our growing spaces. So you should be growing fertilizer at the same time you are growing food. You should be growing animal feed. And not just the discards from the food part, but for our rabbits, for our chickens, for our pigs, our annual growing spaces provide up to 1/3 to 1/2 of what we feed them during the year. Depending, obviously, there's this seasonal cycle of different things peaking and what's available and whatnot. So we're growing fertilizer, we're growing animal feed, we are growing pharmaceuticals in our garden spaces, and then we are growing flowers. All of this should be going on at the same time. Pests hate this. Diseases hate this in your annual growing spaces because it's confusing to them. It's, if I'm a pest, what am I looking for? I'm looking for that stressed pepper plant that is sitting all by itself on a sun-baked hillside just asking me to eat it. I don't want to be a pest and have to spend 40 minutes looking through your garden to figure out what plant's the right one for me to eat. And I certainly don't want that plant protected by a bunch of other plants that I don't like to eat or that are dangerous to me. So this is what our garden spaces look like over the course of a year. We do things like undercropping and overcropping. We do very, very intentional, very, very tight companion planting. And we are companion planting plants that are as opposite as possible to the main food crops. Because again, what we're looking for is these kind of things that really annoy diseases and pests, so they cannot be passed from one to the other. So this is a good example. This is us doing, and we're also gardening 4-dimensionally, which I don't really have time to talk about fully today. But how many of you lay out your garden on a sheet of paper? Almost, that's how you think about a garden. You take a 2-dimensional sheet of paper and you lay out your garden. But your garden grows in 3 dimensions, because there's also height out in the garden. And then there's also time. And when you can manage all 4 of those, I can grow more food in 2,000 square feet than I used to be able to grow in 20 through good space and time management. And so here we have cucumbers. Underneath the cucumbers, we have basil. Really great plant to match up against cucumbers, very fragrant. Pests and stuff doesn't like it. Underneath the basil, we have our fertilizer and animal forage coming in of clover. And that's going to grow up underneath the basil, because as the basil and the cucumbers get taller, I want to continue to have a dense ground cover underneath them. And then next to those, I have some bush beans that, those are kind of a short crop, so we're matching timing here. The bush beans are going to come out by the time that the basil and the cucumbers fully shade them. And then I have peppers, and all of this starts over again with a row of peppers. And then, for the peppers, we might put different fragrant plants, or I think for these peppers, right next to those, we did calendula and marigolds. And then we did clover underneath. And so now in one block of space, we're growing 4, 5, 6 different things all at the same time. This is intensive rather than extensive growing. You can get so much more food this way for so much less work. Just imagine getting 3 or 4 times more food from a quarter, a half, a third, a tenth of the space. Because this is what I discovered over time. I was just killing myself managing so much space poorly. Other things you need to know about growing more in tight spaces. This will reduce the stress on your plants immeasurably. When we do on-farm classes, I'll take a thermometer, and I always leave a couple bare spots in our growing spaces, and I will stick the thermometer into the bare spot in a Kentucky July, a Kentucky August. Guess what the top inch of the soil is reading? 130, 135 degrees. What's that doing to your water? What's that doing to your soil microbiome? What is that doing to your nitrogen? Guess what happens to nitrogen and carbon when temperatures get that high and they're exposed to direct sunlight? It's gone. It is out of there. You're losing all of that by exposing soil. So you actually end up conserving water. And what about nutrients? When you have all of these roots in the ground, nutrients are mobilized so much more efficiently because the soil food web is strong, moisture is retained, and microbes are constantly being fed. So they're constantly doing their job of liberating nutrients for your plants. Because a lot of you are thinking like, John, this sounds great, but aren't all the plants going to die? There's not enough water. There's not enough food. Isn't that what you've been told? Why the plants need all of this space? Do pastures need all of this space? There's nowhere else we ever see this idea that plants need all of this isolated space to grow healthily. And so over time, if you do this right, your soil becomes almost bulletproof, which makes growing a lot more in a small space a lot easier. So this is another example, trellised banana peppers. underneath a clover bed. Clover is just one of the best things, at least in our area, that we can grow as what's called an understory. And if you're somebody who's a little bit more commercial grower, really recommend go to Facebook, that very, very dark place. This is like, what's that movie, The Lion King? It's like that's the place we don't go. Go to Facebook, the place we don't go, and look up Steve Diver, who oversees one of the University of Kentucky extension farms. He is a beyond organic farmer who's been a friend of mine now for a decade, who can give you good tools to do this type of thinking at a more commercial scale. So if you're not like a backyard garden scale. Again, clovers, this is chives growing underneath cucumbers that are gonna come up. And then, with a clover and you can also see I think those are calendula coming in as well. And now I got this picture on purpose because you're going, John, I can barely see the plants. Isn't this a problem? No, it's a solution, because we have little hand size. One of our favorite farm tools, a little hand size, it's like 6-inch blade, 6-inch handle, will go through these beds if the understory crops become too aggressive, and you just chop and drop it. And now you're growing your own mulch. Or we chop it, and here is your rabbit food. Or we chop it, and here is your pig feed. Or we chop it, and here is your free clover seed that you grow yourself, so you're not buying $30 a pound cover crop seed. This isn't a problem, this is a solution. Just takes the right tool and the right mindset. And again, what would you rather spend your time doing? Would you rather spend 5 minutes in the morning chopping down a cover crop that's reducing your feed bill for your animals and reducing your fertilizer bill, or do you want to spend 50 minutes weeding? I know which choice I'm making every time. I was very good at multiple choice tests as a child. So this is a solution looking for a problem rather than a problem looking for a solution. If these other plants get too aggressive, you just trim them back. It's really that easy. And I'd rather be choosing plants I trimmed. I've wandered so far. There's a podium. This always gets me in trouble at conferences. Wander all the way out into the audience. They have to get me back. So most of us are underutilizing our growing spaces. You are underutilizing your growing spaces. There's a famous Dutch theologian by the name of Abraham Kuyper, or Kuyper, depending on how you like to pronounce it. He once said that there's not a single square inch of the entire creation that Christ does not cry out, mine. Making a theological claim. This should be your attitude with your garden. There should not be a single square inch of your garden that you don't cry out and claim, well, that's mine. Because if you don't claim that space in the garden, weeds will. So the second way, well, John, how do I know I'm doing this? How do I know I'm growing more right? My goal is a couple weeks after the summer solstice, I do not want to be able to see a single inch of bare space in one of our annual growing spaces. Not a single square inch. If I can have it all green, that's great. If it's not green, then it's going to be mulched. So not a single square inch of our growing spaces is going to be available, though, for something that I don't want to grow to get growing. So third and last point, start aggressively mulching. There are 3 types of mulches, categories of mulches that are really popular right now. The first one I've touched on a little bit, living mulches. Living mulches are highly underutilized by modern gardeners. If you can get used to using living mulches in your garden, it's going to revolutionize the way you grow plants. And it's going to save you tons of money over time. And it's going to do so much to build your soil. So living mulches, again, are plants you grow that live on the soil and act like a mulch, protecting it, conserving water, doing all of these other beneficial things. Second type of mulch are human mulches, plasticulture, tarps. We use sheet metal at times as a mulch, like underneath our garden fencing, because who wants to weed underneath a garden fence? So I get old pieces of sheet metal off of barn roofs that have been damaged, slice them down to the width I want, and I lay them under the garden fence. Because how many of you have ruined a deer fence with a weed whacker? You know, there's these impermeable man-made mulches. I'm not a big fan of plasticulture, personally. And then the third type of mulch are what we call biomulches. Biomulches are hay, straw, wood chips, and similar organic materials with which you mulch your garden areas. This is like my favorite conference ever. My wife is probably worried that I'm gonna be filling our van with wood chips to take home. Wood chips, if you wanna get me something for Christmas, please get me a PTO-driven wood chipper. I have been looking for a good size. For like a 4-county radius in Kentucky, I think the wood chip trucks for the tree trimmers call each other when they know that I am on the road to avoid me. Because I'll be late for work before I will miss accosting a wood chip truck to ask them to come dump their chips at my farm. I absolutely adore wood chips. I don't think there is a better mulch that you can get your hands on than wood chips. If you can't get your hands on wood chips, finding good, clean straw that is not grown, sprayed to death with chemicals is our second favorite biomulch to bring in. I am not a fan of bringing hay into my garden. Anybody know why we don't like bringing hay into the garden? Because hay is full of nothing but weed seeds. And what is the goal with your garden? So nothing against Ruth Stout and all of her devotees, and I will fight you after this talk because I've missed training now for like 5 straight days, so I'm itching for a little. But I'm not a big fan of hay if you're one of those hay gardeners. I think you're just long-term, you got yourself on what I call the hay treadmill. So mulch is awesome though. If you can't make your entire garden green, at the very least, make it brown. Make it brown with mulch. Put down lots of mulch. If you're doing wood chips, the biggest mistake people make with wood chip mulches is they do not age them properly. This is one reason that a lot of people, they see the Back to Eden guy, and they're like, I can just throw wood chips on my garden and everything will grow great and I'll never have to do anything hard again. And then they call me a couple months later, like, my garden died. I'm like, well, what'd you do? They're like, I poured a bunch of wood chips on it. I was like, how old were the wood chips? They're like fresh off the truck, man. It smelled like a cedar factory, like a woodworking shop. I'm like, yeah, like aromatics, acids, all of these other things your soil does not like. Now you're putting them straight into your soil, and all of those allopathic chemicals that the wood chips carry. You just dump them all on your soil, and now things aren't gonna grow for a while. Welcome to reality. So if you do wood chip mulches, avoid the biggest mistake people are making because of not getting the full story. You have to age the wood chips long enough to ensure they are not gonna hurt your soil or hurt your plants. And you go, John, well, how do I know that wood chips have aged long enough? We use what we call the sight and the smell test. If I can smell a pile of wood chips and tell you what kind of tree it came from, or I can look at the wood chips and tell you what kind of tree it came from, the wood chips aren't aged enough. Good. So these strategies work with just about everything you grow. We've been using these strategies now for about a decade. I outline how to use them more specifically in my book. And I just really want to thank John and Arlen for making this event possible. It's so great to be able to do a homesteading event in my own backyard where I'm originally from. I just want to thank all of you for making it possible and giving me a few minutes of your time.